Hello, I'm Dr. Neal Barnard. Let's talk about a new dietary approach to diabetes. As you know, diabetes is a condition where the body isn't handling its natural sugar, that is glucose. It's not handling glucose very well. Normally, glucose is the fuel that allows our body to function. But in diabetes, the hormone that is supposed to escort glucose into the cells isn't doing its job well, and that hormone is called insulin. Let's walk through the basics of what diabetes is, and then we're going to talk about a new approach to get things back on a better track. Okay, first of all, insulin is made in the pancreas. The pancreas is an organ in the middle of your abdomen. It's about the size and shape of a TV remote control. And remote control is really what insulin is all about. It's made in the pancreas, it goes in the bloodstream, and then it arrives at the cells of the body where it acts almost like a key, opening up the cells to allow glucose to come inside. Well, there are different types of diabetes. In type 1 diabetes, which used to be called childhood onset diabetes, the pancreas isn't making insulin anymore. Now, type 2 diabetes is different. This is what used to be called adult onset diabetes, and there, at least in the beginning, the body is making plenty of insulin, but the cells of the body are not responding well to it. The pancreas then reacts. It makes more and more and more insulin, but it's just not providing enough. It's got not enough of those good working keys to open up the cells to let the glucose come inside. There's a third type, gestational diabetes. That's what the type of diabetes that occurs during pregnancy. It goes away after pregnancy is over, but it's a sign that type 2 diabetes is just around the corner. Now, with type 1 diabetes, that's about, maybe 5 to 10% of people with diabetes. You need to take insulin. However, the diet changes you'll learn about in this program, as well as exercise, can really help minimize insulin doses and can help reduce the risk of complications. Now, when the cells are less sensitive to insulin's action, this is the onset, or this is the main contributor to type 2 diabetes. Now, insulin resistance can run in families. However, it can get better or it can become much worse depending on certain things. It depends on how much body fat you develop. It depends on the foods you eat. And it also depends on how much you exercise. And if we let it get out of control, uncontrolled diabetes can lead to problems from head to toe. Now, how do we know what kind of control we're in? Well, diabetes control is measured by a blood test. You may be familiar with this. It's called hemoglobin A1C, or just A1C for short. And we'll talk more about this blood test in a little bit. Okay, let's take a look at the current approach for type 2 diabetes. For most people, if you go and you see a health professional who gives you a typical diet for diabetes, you're going to be limiting carbohydrate and trying to keep the amount of carbohydrate steady from one day to the next. So breads, or pasta, or rice, or potatoes, you're going to be careful about those. And what I'm describing now is really the approach that has been used up until now. We're going to, in a few minutes, look at a new approach. But you're keeping carbohydrates steady, you're cutting calories, you're adding exercise to try to lose weight, you'll limit fats to keep your cholesterol under control, and then if diet isn't enough, which in most cases this diet approach is not, you'll need to add oral medications and perhaps insulin if necessary. Let me suggest a new approach. Science has brought us a new approach, starting with population studies. Diabetes is rare in Asia or Africa, in places where the traditional diets are still being followed. But it becomes very, very common when the diet's westernized. So if I'm in rural Japan and I'm following a rice-based traditional diet, there's not that much diabetes. But if hamburgers and if Western diet habits really take hold, then diabetes becomes much more common. Or if a person moves from Asia to North America, diabetes becomes more common as well. In the US and in Europe, vegetarians have much less diabetes compared to meat eaters. If you compare vegetarians to non-vegetarian women, the non-vegetarian women have 40% more diabetes. Non-vegetarian men, 80% more diabetes. So prior studies have really led the way for new tests that have showed us how well a plant-based diet might work. Let me describe one to you. This is Dr. Dean Ornish's work, where he used in heart patients a low-fat vegetarian diet, mild exercise, no smoking, and stress management. And what he found was a near elimination of chest pain. Heart disease reversed in 82% of patients, and the average weight loss, 22 pounds in a year. Sounds pretty good, doesn't it? So my team did a weight control study where we used a low-fat vegan diet, but we didn't have people exercise because we wanted to zero in on just what diet alone could do, and it was about a 14-week study. And what we found was the average weight loss in 14 weeks was 13 pounds. That's about a pound a week, average. 2 inches came off the average waistline, and something called the thermic effect of food improved. That's the after-meal calorie burn that you get. It got better. Insulin sensitivity improved as well. And that suggests that this diet ought to be a good approach for type 2 diabetes. So the federal government, starting in 2003, funded my research team to do a test. The test was to see if a vegan diet might improve diabetes compared to a more typical diet. The team was Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine, George Washington University, and the University of Toronto. Here's the study design. We compared a diet that was vegan, low-fat, and low glycemic index. I'll explain that in a minute. The other diet followed the American Diabetes Association diet guidelines. It was 22 weeks with a 1-year follow-up, and we tracked A1C. Now, let me show you a graph. And as you can see, on the red line, these are people following the ADA diet. You want your A1C to be below 7, or as close to 6 as possible. And at the beginning of the study, we really weren't there. Everyone started right about 8. The red line was the people following the ADA diet, and by 11 weeks, they had dropped down to about 7.4. And between 11 and 22 weeks, well, they inched up just a little bit. But look at this blue line. As you can see, these are the vegans. They started around 8 too, but they fell very nicely. At 11 weeks, they were down to about 7.2, and by 22 weeks, they were down under 7. This is average, and this is the group of participants where everything else was constant. They weren't changing their medications. They weren't changing their exercise habits. This is a good test of diet alone. Let's talk about cholesterol. You know about LDL, low-density lipoprotein, bad cholesterol? Well, you want that well below 100. Some would say even below 80 or perhaps even 70. Well, the red line here is the ADA group. They started at about 115. They had a nice drop down to about 105. But look at that blue line. That's the vegan group. They had an average drop of LDL of 21%. These are the participants where nothing else was changing. If they were taking cholesterol-lowering drugs, they weren't changing anything there. It was just a diet change. This is powerful. Now, there are some advantages to this approach. There are no calorie limits, no carbohydrate limits, no portion limits. You're not counting. You're not measuring. This is powerful for weight control, powerful for controlling cholesterol. And many people find it easier to follow than diets where you have to count carbohydrates. Now, there are 3 steps to this diet. Very important. Step 1, this is a vegan diet. Now, people who follow a vegan diet are not from the planet Vegas. A vegan diet means no animal products. So there's no meat, there's no fish, no poultry, no dairy products, no eggs, that kind of thing. But there's lots of vegetables and fruits and whole grains and legumes. Now, you'll want to, as you shop, read labels on packaged foods because they can often hide a little bit of cheese or milk or things like that in there. But you'll want to have lots of fruits and vegetables and beans and whole grains. Now, here is why I don't say just go from beef to chicken. The leanest beef is about 29% fat as a percentage of its calories. Let's say I pick chicken. Let's say I take the skin off the chicken and throw away the dark meat. Well, it's still about 23% fat. Fish vary. Some are lower, some are higher. Some are a lot higher, like Chinook salmon, about 50% fat. That's way too much fat for you. Now, look at beans. Look at broccoli. Look at rice. These foods are very, very low in fat unless you add fat to them. So don't do that and focus on these foods. But if you go from just beef to chicken, it's not enough of a change. There's another advantage of vegan diets. Your protein is all from plant sources, and that's good because animal protein is known to be a problem for people who already have a little bit of kidney disease. At Harvard, the Nurses' Health Study looked at women who had a little bit of kidney damage to start with, and they found that the more animal protein they ate, the more kidney damage they had. Now, this matters. This is important because many people have a little bit of kidney damage already. This is very common if you've got diabetes. About 40% of people with diabetes have already lost some kidney function. Okay, so let's go back to our dietary method. Step 1 was what? Vegan diet, right? No animal products. Step 2 is you want to keep it low in fat. So cut out the high-fat foods. Some people use a lot of oils in their cooking. We'll show you in this program how to cook without added oils. Skip the oily foods, the nuts, the seeds. I'm sorry to say avocados and olives are very fatty too. And you want to step away from the high-fat dressings and fatty condiments. And some of the meat substitutes that you'll see, vegetarian hot dogs, some of them are quite low in fat, some of them are high in fat. Choose the low-fat ones. Keep in mind, all fats and oils have 9 calories in every gram. Now, carbohydrates are much lower in calories. They only have 4 calories per gram. Plus, all fats and all oils are mixtures. Even olive oil. It's got a lot of monounsaturated fat. That's the one that people feel is maybe more neutral for your heart. But it has about 13% of its calories are nothing but plain old saturated fat. So keep oils to an absolute minimum. Now, how much should I have? Aim for about 20 to 30 grams of fat per day. Or in a typical serving, maybe 2 grams of fat if you're reading the food label. So, you don't use oils as you cook. You can use vegetable broth or water. You know these recipes that say saute your onions in a little bit of oil? Saute them in broth. Saute them in water. Steam foods instead of frying. Use a non-stick cooking spray if you have to, but keep that to a minimum. And you can use a non-fat dressing. You can use a non-fat vegan mayo. And use bean spreads or perhaps hummus instead of margarine or other greasy toppings. Applesauce in a baked recipe works fine. The other thing, as you're going low fat, think about the high fiber foods. Whole grains, for example, as opposed to white bread. Beans, a very nice high fiber food. High fiber cereals have lots of vegetables and fruits. Why fiber? Fiber fills you up. Fiber makes you feel full and satisfied so that you don't want to be, it will allow you to lose weight naturally and you won't want to be then having more and more food than you really need. So have a lot of high fiber foods. Third step is low glycemic index. What is the glycemic index? Glycemic index is a number that shows us how fast does a food release sugar into your bloodstream. If it's a high glycemic index food, the sugar goes into your bloodstream fast. If it's low glycemic index, the sugar enters the bloodstream rather slowly. Let me give you some examples. How about sugar itself? If I eat sugar, that causes the blood sugar to rise, and this is no surprise. But what if I have white bread? White bread breaks down to sugar too, fairly rapidly, much more rapidly than, say, rye bread or pumpernickel bread. Cold cereals also, most of them have been processed enough that they digest rather rapidly and release sugar into the blood. White potatoes also, more so than yams or sweet potatoes. Well, what are some low glycemic index good foods? Beans are your glycemic index champions. They release sugars into the blood only very slowly. Green vegetables, fruits, just about all of them except for pineapples and watermelons. Pasta, that's a surprise, isn't it? Pasta is actually a low glycemic index food. Rye, pumpernickel bread also. So at a glance, you want to skip the white and wheat breads. They tend to cause blood sugar to rise. Favor pumpernickel or rye. Most cold cereals, you want to avoid them. Instead, have oatmeal or bran cereals, grape nuts, that kind of thing. Most fruits are fine except for watermelon and pineapples. Now, baking potatoes, skip them. But have sweet potatoes and yams. Have pasta, rice, barley, couscous, beans, peas, lentils. They're all great. Avoid the sugar, but have lots and lots of vegetables. Okay. You might want to use, there's a website called glycemicindex.com. It shows all the GI testing that you can use. A couple of things very important. You want to take a multiple vitamin every day. This will give you vitamin B12, which is important. And have a healthcare provider that you work with. Let your provider know, I'm about to change my diet. Change your blood sugar. It's likely to fall when you're on this diet. And if you're on medications that can contribute to very low blood sugar, especially insulin and a group called the sulfonylureas, you want to be aware of the possibility that your blood sugar can run low if you're really improving your diet. Check with your healthcare provider to be ready to back off your medicines when the time is right. Carry a glucose meter with you. So, what's my shopping list? Well, have some pumpernickel or rye bread if you like bread. Have old-fashioned oatmeal, all-bran cereal, barley, quinoa, buckwheat. These are all good, and whole wheat pasta is especially good. Have lots of vegetables. Go down the produce aisle, fill up your cart. Fruits, same story, and beans, you can't do better. Load up on them, whether they're dried or canned. You can look for the low-sodium varieties if you like. So, think about your own meals now. Plan them out. Is breakfast a big bowl of old-fashioned oatmeal, perhaps topped with cinnamon? Lunch, would that be, say, a vegetable stew, lentil soup with some rye bread? For dinner, if we're having pasta, we're not going to top it with meat sauce, but maybe a light marinara. You'll want to have all those on hand, and plenty of fruit for snacks. I hope you enjoy this new program, and I look forward to working with you in future online sessions.